I've been using the Sony a6400 for about 18 months now. I loved it when I first started shooting on it, and I still love using this camera today. So the Sony a6400 is my first mirrorless camera. I work as a television producer where I do a lot of shooting, and I love to shoot. I love shooting on the Canon C100 and the Sony FS5 at work. They're both fantastic cameras and they do a great job. But when I decided to start my own YouTube channel and I wanted to do a little bit more freelance work, I needed to get my own gear. So I was in the market for a new camera. I looked around for a while and there were a lot of great cameras out there. I loved using Canon cameras and I didn't have much experience with Sony cameras, but when I got to use the Sony FS5, I really enjoyed it. I really liked the results. So after doing a little bit of research, I decided to get the Sony a6500. Yes, the Sony a6500. But, and this is a big but, in early 2019, Sony announced the Sony a6400. You might remember everybody and their cats were invited to whatever, Catalina Island or something like that by Sony to check out the a6400. I was not invited and either was my cat. We were both disappointed. So Sony dropped a new camera and the rest is history. I bought the Sony a6400 and I never looked back. I just remembered I never actually introduced myself in this video. So if you're new to the channel, my name is Dave. This channel is all about filmmaking tips and camera gear. If that's something that interests you, then please consider subscribing. If not, no worries, that's okay. Anyways, back to the video. Before we get too far into the video, I wanted to point out that yes, I know there are much better cameras out there than the a6400. I know that, and you know that. As a matter of fact, I'm actually hoping to buy the Sony a7S III at some point in the near future. I was looking at the Canon C70, which also looks like a fantastic camera. But back to the Sony a6400. The main reason I purchased this camera was, for one, the price. It comes in at around 1,000 US or 1,200, maybe 1,300 Canadian with the kit lens. And I was on a budget and this camera fit that budget, which was perfect. Another thing I was looking for was that a camera that could shoot in 4K video. And the 4K on this camera is awesome. The third big feature that I really wanted in a camera was the ability to shoot in HD at 120 frames per second so that I can get some nice, smooth, slow-mo footage. Well, the a6400 had all those features and they added a flip screen. Not the best flip screen in the world, but it's a flip screen. The Sony a6300 and the 6500 do not have a flip screen. So this put it above those ones for sure. So what is it about this camera that makes it still great after 2 years after it was released? For me, it just works. It's a workhorse. I have never had any real issues with this camera. I've used it in all kinds of weather, in all kinds of conditions, and it shoots great video and takes great photos. What more can you ask for? Since this was my first mirrorless camera, there was a little bit of a learning curve, but I've already used the very interesting Sony menu system, so I quickly fell in love with this camera. Not in a weird way, in a loving way. I have used this camera to shoot some footage for national sports broadcasters here in Canada, for other television productions, for corporate videos, for weddings, and I even shoot a cooking show with this camera as my main camera. Now, I also shoot most of my YouTube videos with this camera and a whole bunch of other freelance jobs I do with this a6400. So let's take a look at some of the reasons this camera still competes with some of the newer cameras on the market today. Now, I've already mentioned the high quality 4K video, and I shoot most of my stuff in 4K 24 frames because I just like the look. It also gives me the option to crop in or move my shots or make some kind of movement in my shots. Many times I will edit an interview where I will keep the shot wide and then cut into a shot to make it look like I have two cameras on set. This is a big deal for me. I love to have that look. Another big reason to use 4K and to be able to crop in is the ability to shoot a speech. If somebody is making a speech and they've made it through half their speech and then they screw up, well, they don't want to start over the whole speech. They can just do a pickup and then you can take that shot, crop it in, you make it look like you have a second camera. It doesn't look like a jump cut. Everything looks good. You're happy because it takes you less time to shoot it, and the client is happy because it takes them less time and it still makes them look good. This camera does not have a record limit, which is awesome. The previous Alpha cameras did have a limit, which was a real pain. And now I can record an entire hour shoot without worrying that this thing's going to stop or create separate clips, which is a bit of a pain as well. Now, when talking about record limits, we also need to talk about the heating issues. Now, this thing really doesn't overheat. I mean, eventually it will, but I know I can shoot for a very, very long time and it's not going to overheat on me and shut down. Matter of fact, I've never had this thing overheat and shut down, knock on wood. So hopefully that doesn't happen in the future. But the ability not to have a record time limit and also to be able to not overheat and stay cool while you're shooting, that's a big plus with the Sony a6400. When I bought this camera, I bought it with the kit lens. It was the Sony 16-50 kit lens. Nothing great, but I didn't have any Sony glass at that point, so I started to shoot on it. And the kit lens was actually pretty decent. I was really impressed with it. It's small, it's lightweight, could fit it on a gimbal, that's great. But soon after, I decided to upgrade my lens game, and I got the Sigma 16mm, which is great, and the Sony Power Zoom 18-200 lens. Not a lot of people know about that. So I was pretty happy with my upgraded lenses. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that you can use a lot of different lenses with this camera. Sure, this is an APS-C camera, but your lens options are really decent for that APS-C. And if you go with an APS-C lens, most of the time you're going to pay a lot less money for a lens than a full frame lens. And you can also use Sony full frame lenses with the E-mount, which is fantastic. And if you get the proper adapter, you can slap on Canon glass or any other glass on these cameras. I have some Canon glass that I like to use, so I use an adapter, speed booster, something like that. And then you get to use your very expensive Canon glass on such a small APS-C camera. Sure, you don't get the full effects of those lenses, but you know what? You're still able to use them, and you have that option if you want to use different lenses with this camera. That's great to have those options. When this camera first came out, the autofocus was first class. I mean, the autofocus is still awesome on this camera, but when it first came out, even full-frame Sony camera users were impressed with how fast and responsive the autofocus on this system was. If you're shooting photos with this camera, the eye autofocus is nearly perfect, and it also has animal eye autofocus, which is kind of freaky. I shoot most of my footage in manual focus because, well, I'm old and that's how I learned. And I had to learn how to shoot using manual focus. But I do use the autofocus, especially for my own YouTube channel. I'm a lone shooter, so I love having that autofocus option when I'm shooting my own videos. Now, the flip-out screen is great. It took me some time to get used to it. I have used Canon cameras with the full flip-out screen to the side, which I love and I actually prefer. But after a while, I got used to this top flip-out screen. Now, I still don't like the fact that the hot shoe is right in the middle, so if you go ahead and put a microphone on there, it's in the way, and now you have to get an adapter or something like that, which I have, so it's not that big a deal. And I use a cage very often, so I can just move my microphone to either side, and then I have that option of good audio, and I can also use the flip screen. A little bit annoying, but you know what? I got used to it, and now it's second nature, and I just love using it. This camera is very small and lightweight, which is perfect for a gimbal, of course. I use the DJI Ronin SC with this camera. It's a perfect match. They work really, really well together, and the results are great. Now, most of the time, I slap on this lens right here. This is the Sigma 16, which is perfect. It's nice and wide and gives you that stable footage when you put it on a gimbal. The image quality on the a6400 is excellent. Then you slap that on a gimbal, it really gives you some nice, smooth footage. I also use the Sigma 30 every now and then, which will give you some really cool results and some really great deep bokeh. Sometimes you love the bokeh. You slap that on a gimbal and you really have some nice results there. The color science on this camera still holds up today, and the picture profile options are very, very helpful. For me, I use the HDL2 profile or sometimes the S-Log profile depending on what I'm shooting and if I have time to grade it. I've also used the no picture profile or off, which sounds kind of scary, but it's actually a pretty decent rate out of the camera. I like to add a little bit of contrast and a little bit of saturation to my shots when I do that. But for the most part, I'm very, very happy. And for the most part, I'm happy with the results straight out of the camera with those profiles. So depending on which picture profile you're looking to shoot in, you have a lot of options still with this camera. I mentioned earlier that I'm a television producer, so most of the times I use this camera for video. But the photos on this camera are really good. Having a small form factor camera that can shoot really good video and excellent photos is so valuable. So that's another reason I really love this camera. This camera still holds up after 2 years, but it's not perfect. No camera is perfect. Most Sony cameras have horrible rolling shutter, and this camera has that as well. There's no IBIS in this, as we all know, so a lot of people may be turned off from this camera because of the lack of IBIS. For me, it's not such a big deal. I've used lots of professional cameras that don't have IBIS. You just have to stabilize and make sure your shots are nice and smooth yourself. It's great to have the IBIS, but the fact that this doesn't have IBIS wasn't a real factor for me not to get the camera. And if you have some lenses with optical steady shot, that really does help smooth out your shots as well. And I mentioned I love putting this camera on a gimbal, and I just like the look of a shot on a gimbal. So for me, IBIS wasn't that important. So we can't talk about this camera and not mention the Sony a6400, which came out after the Sony a6400. The 6600 is a great camera. It has IBIS, it has a much better battery, and all the features that this camera has. So it's a great camera, but it's also an extra $500. So for me, I'd rather spend that extra money on upgrades and accessories for this camera. However, if you're looking to get a new camera, maybe the Sony a6600 would be the camera for you. And if you have that extra budget, hey, it's a great camera. It has a lot of the same features, but it has, like I said, the IBIS and the bigger battery. So if those features are important to you, then hey, maybe that is a better camera for you. But for me, this camera still holds up to the Sony a6600, plus I save another $500. I've been looking long and hard for a new camera to go along with this one, but I wanted another APS-C camera to go along with my lenses. It just makes sense. Now, my wish list of features is pretty modest. I really only want a camera that can shoot 4K 60 frames. That's it. I'm not too picky. And right now, none of the 6000 series Alpha cameras will do that. Sure, I can go ahead and get a more expensive camera, and that'll do the job for me. If I had the money, I would probably upgrade to the Sony a7S III, which has amazing features. But it's also a much more expensive camera, and I would need to get full frame lenses to get the most out of that camera. Sure, you can use your APS-C lenses on there, but honestly, full frame's much better on that camera. So if you're still using the Sony a6400 as your main camera, are you still happy with it? I know I am. I've been so impressed with it, and it just works. It gets the job done. If you're in the market for a new APS-C camera, you can't go wrong with this camera. Hopefully, you'll get it on sale. Although I've been looking around as getting another one of these cameras, it really doesn't go on sale very often, which maybe says that it does stand up and they know they have a very good product. So let me know in the comments your thoughts on the Sony a6400 after all these years. Actually, it's only 2 years. And one of those years was 2020, so it made it through that year, so that's a pretty good sign. Anyways, thanks for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to watch my videos. If you have any questions or you want to talk about this camera, please let me know in the comments. I love talking about this camera in the comments. Until next time, see you later.